It seems that a storm has broken out in the Basilica of Aparecida, and the wind of this controversy has reached the Vatican. What has prompted Pope Francis himself to speak out so strongly? The Bishop of the Basilica of Aparecida, known for his strong words, allegedly crossed all boundaries during a mass broadcast to thousands of faithful throughout Brazil. The reactions were immediate: shock, indignation, and now, fear. Many are wondering, will the Pope remove him? Tensions are growing in every corner of the parish because everything has been recorded. What really happened on this holy altar? What caused the faith of so many to waver? Are we witnessing the beginning of a historic decision? Stay with us because the truth will soon come out, and you will want to know every detail of this story that could change the direction of the Church. The Basilica of Aparecida, one of the most important Catholic sanctuaries in Brazil and a place of pilgrimage for millions of believers, is going through a delicate and disturbing moment. What was once synonymous with faith and devotion is now a scene of discontent and separation. Many Catholics, once regular visitors to the Basilica, have stopped visiting the holy site because of a controversial and divisive attitude within the religious community: the position of the local bishop. Discontent among the faithful began to grow after it was discovered that the Bishop of Aparecida had embraced liberation theology and ideologies considered close to communism. For many Catholics, such a position contradicts traditional church teaching and papal documents that condemn such currents. Liberation theology, which combines social and economic issues with the Christian faith, has been widely criticized and denounced at various points in the Church's recent history. During the pontificates of John Paul II and then of Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, this approach was met with harsh warnings, considering it a dangerous mix of faith and Marxist ideology. It is this mixture that is causing growing discomfort among Catholics. Many wonder how Christian principles can be combined with ideologies that, according to church doctrine, distort the truth of the gospel. The result is a gradual but significant departure of believers who now seek spiritual refuge in other parishes, communities, and holy places that are more in line with the traditional magisterium of the Church. The scenario is full of emotion and pain for Catholics who built their faith in Aparecida. For many, abandoning a place that was a sanctuary of hope is a difficult decision, but one seen as necessary for preserving the integrity of the faith. "I no longer recognize the basilica I once knew," laments one faithful who preferred to remain anonymous. "I feel betrayed by the direction they have taken." But the situation also raises important questions. How can the unity of the Church be preserved in such polarized times? For some, the criticism of Bishop Aparecida is exaggerated and constitutes a baseless witch hunt. For others, they are a necessary warning sign to protect the purity of the Catholic faith from possible ideological contamination. In recent years, liberation theology has been one of the most controversial and debated topics in the Catholic Church, provoking controversy and divided opinions among the faithful. Some see it as a necessary response to the social and economic problems facing millions of people, while others see it as a threat to the essence of the Christian faith, a dangerous mix of the gospel and ideologies that distort the message of Christ. This theological approach has been met with sharp rebukes, especially during the pontificates of Pope John Paul II and then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI. Even today, liberation theology is a source of intense debate and tension in the Catholic community. Emerging in Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s, liberation theology offers a vision of the Christian faith that is closely linked to the fight for social justice and the rights of the poor and oppressed. For its defenders, it is an interpretation of the gospel that gives a voice to the marginalized, proposing concrete actions to combat social inequality. Its critics, however, argue that by approaching Marxist ideologies, this theological current ultimately distorts the true message of Christianity and threatens the unity and integrity of the Catholic faith. It was in the face of this threat that the Catholic Church, under the leadership of John Paul II, decided to take decisive action. The Polish Pope, known for his unwavering defense of the traditional doctrine of the Church, publicly expressed his concern about the influence of liberation theology, fearing that it would lead to a confusion of the message of Jesus with revolutionary and political ideals. According to John Paul II, the Christian faith should not be instrumentalized for ideological purposes, and the proclamation of the gospel should remain free from contamination by human ideologies. In 1984, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, then headed by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, published the document Instruction on Certain Aspects of Liberation Theology. In this text, the Church condemned the appropriation of Marxist elements by liberation theology, warning of the risk of reducing the Christian faith to a political and social movement. Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict XVI, was one of the most active voices in this fight, arguing that the true liberation offered by the gospel is an interior liberation from sin, not a social revolution. The Vatican's rebuke reverberated through parishes, seminaries, and Catholic communities, generating a wave of tension and questions. Many liberation theologians felt misunderstood and persecuted, believing they were being condemned for trying to live the gospel in a concrete and active way. For them, fighting for the rights of the poor and combating social injustice were an essential part of the Christian mission. They said that ignoring the inequalities present in the world would be a betrayal of Christ's teachings. On the other hand, supporters of the position of Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Ratzinger viewed liberation theology as a dangerous subversion of the faith. For them, this theological current, by adopting the language and ideas of Marxism, would foster division and conflict within the Church, turning the faithful away from the true meaning of the gospel message. The view that liberation theology is a form of political activism disguised as religiosity became stronger, and the controversy spread throughout the Church, leaving a deep mark that continues to this day. The impact of this debate is still felt in Catholic communities, where liberation theology remains a sore point. In many parishes, especially in Latin America, there is a palpable tension between defenders and critics of liberation theology. Some church leaders are accused of being too close to ideologies condemned by the Church, while others are considered too conservative, turning a blind eye to the reality of the poorest. This dilemma is even more acute as we see believers leaving not because of a lack of faith, but because of deep disagreements with the messages conveyed by some church leaders. Many Catholics, traditionalists, and progressives find themselves at opposite ends of the spectrum, feeling misunderstood and isolated in their own communities. At the heart of this debate is a key question: how can the Church be held together when the very foundations of faith and practice seem to be at issue? The divisions that are emerging today are not just about doctrinal issues, but also include social and political issues that directly affect the lives of believers. For example, the controversy over liberation theology is just one of many issues that have sparked fire in Catholic parishes and communities. While some religious leaders are adopting a discourse more in line with social justice and attention to the marginalized, others are insisting on maintaining the Church's traditional teachings, warning of the risk of ideological contamination. This clash is not limited to the theological sphere. It is reflected in attitudes, behaviors, and, most painfully, in divisions within communities themselves. Believers who support more traditional approaches often express concern about what they see as distortions of the Church's teachings. They believe that the introduction of political and social ideologies into religious discourse can lead to a dangerous dilution of faith, distracting attention from what is considered the center of the gospel, the salvation of souls. For them, the unity of the Church depends on fidelity to the traditional magisterium and the authority of the Pope, and any deviation from this line is seen as a threat to the integrity of the faith. On the other hand, many Catholics see social justice issues as an integral part of Christ's message. They argue that the Church must stand with the oppressed, combat injustice, and be an active voice on behalf of those most in need. In this sense, they believe that church leaders who address social, economic, and political issues fulfill the Church's true prophetic role. For these believers, unity does not mean uniformity of thought, but rather a community that respects the diversity of opinions and the richness of different experiences of faith. In the midst of this polarization, the Church faces a painful and complex dilemma. How can we preserve unity without stifling the diversity of perspectives? How can we maintain communion among believers who are so divided in their beliefs and practices? This situation creates a tension that many Catholics feel in their communities. On the one hand, fear that the faith they love so much is being challenged and transformed. On the other, hope that the Church will become a more inclusive and welcoming space for all. Religious leaders, for their part, face the difficult task of finding a balance. Seeking unity does not simply mean avoiding conflict and suppressing dissenting voices. Instead, it is about promoting sincere and respectful dialogue, in which all concerns and aspirations can be heard and considered. Pope Francis has repeatedly called the Church a field hospital in his pontificate, a place of encounter and healing for all, regardless of differences. He has emphasized the need to walk together as the people of God, despite differences, encouraging an attitude of mercy, understanding, and dialogue. But the path to this unity is not easy. Debates on topics such as liberation theology, the role of the Church in politics, moral teaching, and sacramental practice can cause even deeper divisions. Many wonder whether a common path can be found among so many conflicting opinions. It is known that true unity cannot be forced, but rather built with patience, love, and genuine openness to others. Faced with a scenario marked by division and tension, many Catholics have sought refuge in other parishes and communities where they feel that the Church's teaching has been preserved in its essence. It is as if a silent pilgrimage were taking place, a search for a space that respects and values the teachings that have guided the Catholic faith for centuries. "I no longer feel at home," says a believer with tears in her eyes. "It is sad, but I have to find a place where I can live my faith in peace without so many ideologies." For many, discomfort began when some homilies and speeches given in the Basilica of Aparecida began to touch on social and political issues considered controversial. Among these is the profession of liberation theology and ideas that, according to some believers, are associated with ideologies far removed from the gospel. They believe that faith should not be used as a tool for activism, but rather as a path to the salvation of souls and the practice of love and mercy. As a result, many Catholics now face a painful dilemma: to abandon the Basilica of Aparecida, a place that has so often been a refuge for their prayers and supplications, and seek other parishes and sanctuaries where they can live their faith in communion with the traditional magisterium. This silent migration is a cry for authenticity, a search for a place where the true essence of Catholicism can be found, free from influences deemed harmful to the faith. The removal of the faithful is not a simple act of rebellion, but a movement full of pain and sadness. Many describe this decision as heartbreaking. "I never thought I would have to leave Aparecida," the man confesses, his voice choking. "But I have to be where the message of Christ is clear, without confusion or distortion." A sense of loss and abandonment permeates the lives of many devotees who, even from a distance, continue to carry Aparecida in their hearts. But this decision also gives rise to hope. I hope that we will find communities that value the teaching of the Church, are faithful to the teaching of the Pope, and above all, offer a safe space to live the faith to the full. These parishes and sanctuaries that welcome the faithful of Aparecida thus become places of reconciliation and strength, true spiritual hospitals where love for the Catholic tradition is lived in an intense and authentic way. On the other hand, this movement of the faithful raises profound questions. What is happening to the Church in Aparecida? Have the Church leaders gone too far in their position? How can we reconcile the Church's prophetic call to action in society with the preservation of its identity and teaching? The answers are not easy, and the debate continues to echo in parishes, families, and social media. Meanwhile, it seems that the Basilica of Aparecida, for all its grandeur and beauty, has lost some of the luster that once made it so welcoming. Their ships now echo with the echo of a silent parting, a movement of faith and search for truth that makes many look deep inside themselves and ask themselves, Where will I finally find the path that will lead me to God? In the midst of the altar of the Basilica of Aparecida, a simple but meaningful gesture stirred profound reflection among the faithful. During the Mass, Archbishop Dom Orlando Brandes asked the poor present to stand, which directly touched the emotions and consciences of those who witnessed the scene. For many, this moment was an undeniable call to reflect on the dignity of the most needy and the role they play in both the Church and society. The Archbishop's request, made before thousands of faithful and broadcast live throughout the country, was interpreted by some as a prophetic act. That moment, when the poor stood up in the midst of the crowd, brought to light one of the most fundamental messages of the gospel: care and love for those who suffer the most. It was a moment of pure truth that vibrated in the hearts of Catholics with the power of a long-forgotten message. The dignity of the poor is the dignity of Christ himself. For many present, it was impossible not to be moved. By asking the poor to stand up, the Archbishop not only brought them out of invisibility, but also placed them at the center of the celebration, reminding everyone that the heart of the Church has always been with the small and the marginalized. It's as if he was telling us that our faith is authentic only when it embraces and honors the most needy, said one of the faithful present. The gesture was a call to conscience, an awakening to the mission that Jesus has entrusted to each of us, to love the poor and serve them with compassion and dignity. But the power of this act also brought discomfort. For some, unmasking the poor during Mass was a controversial gesture that could have embarrassed those who stood, publicly recognized for their vulnerability. There was tension in the air, a mixture of conflicting emotions. Pride in the fact that the poor had been recognized, but also concern about how it had come about. Was it possible to speak of the dignity of the poor in this way? Asked one of the faithful. The scene left everyone reflecting deeply on the dignity of the most needy and their place in the Church. As a society and a Christian community, do we truly recognize the dignity of the poor? Or do we only care for them when we are reminded of them at such moments? The Archbishop's gesture was a mirror in which our own attitudes and, in a sense, our neglect of others were reflected. This act brought to light an essential teaching of the gospel. Jesus was always among the poor. He walked with them and treated them with a dignity that the world stubbornly denies. By asking the poor to stand up, the Archbishop placed at the center of the celebration a reality that is often ignored in our churches: that the most needy are not merely recipients of our love, but are in fact a living part of the Church.